Hello, are we live? You guys hear me okay? All right, so thanks you guys for joining me here in this webinar. I will say this is the first webinar I've ever hosted, so it's a little bit of a strange experiment for me. I don't know if it's necessarily uncomfortable, it's just sort of strange because I basically see myself and I don't see you guys in there. But I guess if you're in here, just do me a favor and just add something to the text, like say, hello, I'm in here and I can hear you fine, just so I know that there are some folks in here and that I see the number going up as we go. So, all right, John is in here and looks like Alicia's in here. So cool. Yeah, and so like I said, this is my first time doing a webinar like this. And so I appreciate you guys kind of jumping on here with this experiment for me. And if at any point you can't hear me or anything are going wrong, you just add something over to the chat there for me so I know. But otherwise, I think we are good to go. So I'll go ahead and get started. And I just want to make this, this is going to be probably about like 20-minute webinar. I don't want to go super long because I know you guys are all busy, but I just wanted to kind of share some stuff about a little bit about storytelling, like why storytelling is important, a little bit about like evolution, how it ties into evolution and human nature of who we are as people, and about how you can use this information for yourself and put it to work for you. First, I'll introduce myself. For those of you, most of you guys in here know me. My name is Nathan Young. I teach storytelling. I go by the moniker Greater Good Storytelling, which I think is right there. I'm not sure if it's there on your guys' screens or not, but it is on mine. And basically, I work with a lot of individuals and organizations to help them understand how they can put storytelling to work for them and how they can share their message via storytelling for much stronger impact, but also how they can use storytelling for how they communicate internally and understand the mission of the organization. And it all, storytelling is a very resonant idea with us as humans, as I'm going to get into here in a little bit. And so the more that we can communicate and understand our world through the context of storytelling, the more impact we're going to have, and the better we're going to be able to kind of relate what's important to us to other people we encounter and get our message out there. So that's kind of the crux of storytelling right there. And as I said before, this webinar is going to be about like why is storytelling important. I'll talk a little bit about how humans evolve with storytelling and what that means for how we communicate in our world today, and then some basic tips on how you can use this. And what inspired me to do this webinar on this topic was I recently read this book called Sapiens by his name is Yuval Noah Harari, I think the author's name is. I'll post a link over here. And if you guys have read this book, let me know in the comments. I'd be curious to know how many of you have read this book. There's a link to the Amazon link for it. And but one of the things that was really interesting I found reading that book was one of the arguments that the author made was he talked about how storytelling was like this primary evolutionary advantage that we as Homo sapiens had in the world as our earliest ancestors started to emerge, started to evolve. Like storytelling was really what gave them an advantage in the world. Storytelling, they used it to understand our world, and it gave them an advantage over being able to spread to lots of different environments and deal with lots of different situations they came up with, and also basically outcompeting Neanderthals, which had been this really successful species for millennia prior to Homo sapiens showing up. So, and it was, really rapid the way Homo sapiens spread all over the world. And so part of what, the author claims is like, we use storytelling, our earliest ancestors used storytelling to understand the world around them. Like anytime they had questions, early animals could see correlation, but they couldn't really like understand what was going on. So our earliest ancestors say, as the weather started to get warmer, other animals would know, and Neanderthals would know, like weather started to get warmer, that means there's gonna be food over in this area. But Homo sapiens were the first species to show up on Earth and say like, well, why? Why is that happening? And the mechanism that they used to kind of try and understand the world was storytelling. They sort of saw storytelling as this relationship. There's this sort of cause and effect relationship that they had with storytelling and looking to understand our world. And a lot of the ways that showed up in the way that Homo sapiens, used the mechanisms Homo sapiens used storytelling for was through a lot of folklore and mythology. And if you guys have ever studied folklore and mythology or know much about it, you probably have sort of a cursory knowledge for it. And a lot of, what folklore and mythology is, it can be anything. It can be sort of origin stories, or it can be ways to explain our natural world. So as our earliest ancestors, they saw the moon and the sun and the stars, and they developed stories about where these entities came from. Like, where did the moon come from? Where did the sun come from? A lot of times they would personify these celestial beings. They would have stories about why the stars moved the way they did. And they have stories about like why the sun and the earth had the relationship that they did with each other. And these stories would be used to explain, the changing seasons. They would be used to explain the way the stars moved in the world. They would be used to explain the way animals behaved differently with each other during the changing seasons, and just kind of anything they found out in their world, they would develop a story for. So, as certain food would emerge a certain time of year, they would have a story that maybe relate to, a certain spirit that would bring that food forward. And obviously we don't know exactly what stories they were telling themselves back then, but as I was reading about this in that book, Sapiens, I found that interesting. I started kind of looking for spots in our world and, realizing it's sort of like human nature for us to want to try and develop explanations for things that we find in our world, and then also relate those explanations to storytelling. And I'll give you an example of something that happened with me and my girlfriend. We were just out hiking, and a lot of times, when you start hikes here, you kind of have to go by, maybe there's a neighborhood and a road, and this hike started along a road, and we're going along the trail there, and we came across this spot where this big section of fencing had fallen over onto the trail, and it was just laying across the trail. They had fallen from the road above onto this trail. And, we walked around it, and we didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about it, but we did think to ourselves, like, oh, I wonder how that happened. How did this fence end up down there? And we thought, like, okay, maybe like a car hit it, or maybe it got blown down by the wind, or maybe sort of the soil eroded underneath it. And as we're doing this, I'm realizing, oh, we just encountered this strange phenomenon in our world, and we came up with a couple different scenarios, which were like basically like little stories to explain why this happened, why this fence is falling across the trail there. And I can't help but wonder if that's very similar to how our earliest ancestors might have told stories themselves that they encountered out in the world too. If they saw a tree falling down, or if they saw different animals or different plants, they might have had different stories about why it emerged that way. They would have always gone to that notion of thinking through scenarios as stories. So another way that like stories showed up in folklore and ideas. You guys all follow me here? Is this all making sense so far? Like, you can do a thumbs up over in the comments here if you'd like. So another way that this would have shown up though too is cool. Thank you, Julie. Another way this might have shown up, all right. And another way this might have shown up too is that a lot of times stories were used as lessons also, right? And if you guys are familiar with folklore, a lot of times old folklore will have lessons about, what happens when the kids go out into the woods and they encounter different monsters there. Or there's, in mythology, they have, like, the one I'm thinking of is the myth of Narcissus, who he just was so enamored with his own reflection that he just looked into a pond forever and turned into a swan, I believe it was. And in these are sort of imbued lessons of don't go into the woods by yourself. Don't be so vain that you just look at yourself, your reflection in the water. And these lessons were part of how people related these ideas to the world of each other, like how we should behave. And a lot of us here, and not to say this is just part of an ancient world, this exists in our world today. And I'll give an example, and a very perfect example of sort of a mythological story that has origin myths and kind of teaches lessons is the story of Adam and Eve in the Christian Bible. And for those of you kind of familiar with the story, like Adam and Eve, they were in the Garden of Eden, and it was the Garden of Earthly Delights, and they had all their needs taken care of for them. God was taking care of everything for them. And they only had one rule. They were not supposed to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then what happens? Eve eats the fruit. The snake tricks Eve into eating the fruit from the garden, from the tree of good and evil, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's been a while since I've been to Sunday school, so don't quote me on a lot of this. So then what happens to them? So God comes and sees that they, Eve ate from this fruit. And what does he do? He kicks them out of, or she eats the fruit and she realizes, oh, I'm naked. and she also develops knowledge of good and evil. And then God comes and he shows up and kicks them out of the Garden of Eden. And so what's interesting there is there's a couple different like origin stories in that story of Adam and Eve. And I think sometimes we don't think about this, but in the context of, people that lived thousands of years ago, they would have really seen those origin stories there. They would have understood, okay, this is a story about why we as humans understand good and evil, because animals don't seem to do that. It would also have been a story of why we as humans wear clothes, because they were looking around, seeing animals around them and not wearing clothes. Why are we wearing clothes? And it also would have been, an origin story of like why we work, and why we toil in the fields versus animals that just end up finding their food or they hunt for their food. So it would have been a series of origin stories that humans would have understood that explained their world just through this Adam and Eve story. There's also, some not so subtle nods to patriarchy there, as far as like Eve coming out of Adam's rib and committing the original sin there. So in there, there's those origin stories, and there's also lessons about like obeying God, which was important for that context in that world. So now I've kind of explained how storytelling was used to, explain the world, and we've evolved. We're basically biologically the same people as we were thousands of years ago, and so we've evolved all these years with storytelling as a big part of how we understand the world around us and how we interact with it. And there's another really interesting aspect of this too, because when I'm talking about the story of Adam and Eve, and I'm talking about mythology, like what am I talking about here? I'm talking about religion. And religion has always played a really important role in our world, in that it's basically bound people together. It's been a source of community for human civilization for millennia, basically from the very beginning. And this is interesting too, because this comes up in that book, Sapiens, that I was talking about earlier. One of the points he makes there too is that looking at early human societies, like the archaeological evidence of Neanderthals, and also looking at our closest ape ancestors like chimps and bonobos, one of the things they notice is that those groups, they kind of their troops max out about 130 individuals. And after that, usually when a group gets bigger than that, the group tends to splinter. This is for chimps and bonobos. But what's interesting about that is, even today, us as humans, like we might have like 800 Facebook friends, and we might work in an office and kind of have vague knowledge of hundreds of people and have an address book with hundreds of different names in it. But they've actually done studies that show that like really we're only about capable of maintaining intimate knowledge of about 130 people. That's 130 people is about how many people we can kind of know who they are as humans, and know what's important to them, and have some sort of relationship with them beyond just sort of the cursory relationship. And this is interesting because in the early days of prehistory, and like this for chimps and bonobos and early humans, like that band, your tribe, like that was survival. If you weren't in that group, like you probably weren't going to survive. And they really depended on each other. They had to trust each other. They had to know that they had each other's backs in there. And that's why like, that group of 130 people or less was so important. But as we've seen today, our world is much bigger than that. We live in nations of millions of people, and we interact in companies that are, thousands of people big sometimes. We live in these cities of hundreds of thousands of people. So how are we all doing this? And one of the arguments that's also made in the book is that societies came together through shared stories, as they shared stories related to religion and mythology. These stories encapsulated the worldview of these people, of early people, and for those early people, knowing that one another were of the same worldview, it enabled them to trust each other and cooperate on levels that didn't necessarily require them to have that intimate knowledge of each other that they would have had in that band of 130 people. So that's basically like kind of the crux of how like our whole civilization has evolved, how human society has evolved over the last thousands of years. And it's pretty amazing if you think about it, because this is like storytelling. Two things like that are really critical to who we are as people now is one, how we understand our world, and two, how we understand and evolved as societies. And like these are all just from sharing stories and understanding our world through the context of storytelling. So hopefully this is kind of like making a point, a salient point that you guys can see about how important storytelling can be as far as how you communicate your own messages and how you relate, what's important to you out in the world here, and really get an impact with how you communicate these messages. So as I do this, now I want to get into like, how do you use this? What do you do with this? And I want to relate like another sort of personal story in the middle of this. And so as we're coming up, like it's, December, we're getting close to flu season, right? And I have not gotten a flu shot for close to 10 years. I don't know. Do you guys all get flu shots? You can do a hands up over here if you want to. Yeah, I'd be curious how many of you guys really focus on getting a flu shot. But I haven't done it in 10 years. And I realized the reason why I haven't gotten a flu shot is so stupid. It's the worst reason ever. And it's because every time it comes around, I start to think about like, I should get an appointment. I should go do it. Like, where do I go? I don't even know where to go. CVS, I guess. But then the story kind of creeps into my head of, I saw this like news report years ago. And if you've seen this news report I'm about to talk about, let me know in the comments here also. But I saw this news report years ago about this woman who went and got a flu shot, and she developed this strange neurological condition where she couldn't walk anymore. She walked with these really jerky movements, and she couldn't talk normally anymore. But the strange part about it was she could walk backwards just fine. And when she ran, she could talk just fine. But if she slowed down to a walk again, she got the jerky movements and couldn't talk anymore. And this was on 60 Minutes, like a major national news thing. I remember seeing this and thinking to myself, like, I don't want that to happen to me. And again, it sounds stupid. This is the only documented case of this ever happening. But this one story sort of stuck out to me. And as I waffled on getting a flu shot and making the time in my day for it, I realized that kind of showed up, and it was a little bit larger than life in my head. And I'm like to consider myself a smart, rational guy, but this story stuck with me all these years, and it just defies logic, but it's actually very salient with how stories, how we understand stories in our world, how stories explain our world. Like, we see this one story of this one person, and we think, oh man, that could be me. And that goes back to how, civilizations, the folklores would talk about like the child that goes in the woods and get eaten by a monster. And so the kid that might be tempted to go in the woods would, oh, that might be me. And another example is we see somebody like wins the lottery, 1 in a million chance, but we see that and we get optimistic, oh, that might be me. And we relate to the stories of individuals as we see them. And so I'm sure, hopefully you guys relate to that too, and you have some dumb thing in your world that you do where you do that. Maybe if you're starting to start your own business and you see the success stories and you think to yourself, oh, that could be me. So now I kind of want to get into all right, how do you guys use all this? How can this be put to work for you? This idea of how humans evolve with stories and how we relate to stories as they're shared with us. And I'm going to give you 3 takeaways that you guys can use, hopefully based on this video here. So one of the takeaways is, if you have a story to share, make it specific and get into the details, like a specific person in the story. And this relates to the flu shot story I just shared with you. And because that one woman, it resonated with me, and I know better, and it still got me. But the story of this one woman resonated with me versus the millions of other people that got flu shots every year and don't get sick. But this one story can resonate with me. And you can use this, it doesn't have to be about a fear tactic for a flu shot, but it could be more about, a positive story about the good that you do or the good that your organization does. Highlight, one person that you helped. Because sometimes it's tempting to say oh, we helped all these people. But if you can highlight one person, people really resonate with that. We understand stories through the context of the character in the story. So don't be afraid to really be specific about this is the person's story. Their name is Jim. This is what happened to them. Because we as humans are going to resonate with that much, much more. Another idea is to think about, I talked about how, it's very much part of our, earliest ancestors' understanding of the world is to use storytelling as this sort of cause and effect relationship. And so if you have an idea that you want to share, how can you create a cause and effect story to share this idea. And so one example of this might be, if you, I know some of you work for nonprofits on here, or maybe even have a product that you're sharing, but like, how can you relate a story of like, okay, this person donates to your organization, and what's the effect that creates? What positive effect will somebody's contribution make to the cause that you're promoting here? So anytime you can kind of relate, the story to a cause and effect, you do this, we get this result. That's going to be very salient with how we as humans kind of understand the world and storytelling. And the third point I'll do, the third kind of takeaway that I'll share within this context of storytelling is like I talked about, societies were built on storytelling. Storytelling builds community. And within your organization or anything you do, a social group, sharing stories with each other is going to bring people close together. And it's going to be able to create a bond amongst people that can be larger than that intimacy of 130 people that I talked about. If you can share stories about what's important to you, what drives your mission, what the successes of your organization, this can be all how people get on board with the values you're sharing, the idea that you're sharing, the mission that your organization is on or that you are on personally. By sharing these stories, people will be able to get on board with you, and it'll also help you find other people that would be just naturally inclined to follow what you're sharing. So think of storytelling as a community building mechanism. And so that's pretty much all I got to share there. Hopefully it all made sense to you guys. But if you're interested, I'll open the floor to questions now. If you guys have any questions right now, you can do a little chat, and then I can give you access to, I think I can give you access to come up on the speaker here. But if not, maybe I might have to ask the question in the chat. And so also, like, while you guys are thinking of, if anybody has any questions, while you guys are thinking about this, I'll say too, also part of where I was doing this webinar is part of where this is all going is I'm actually going to start doing some online workshops like this where we can really get deeper into your own stories and figure out how storytelling can work for you via these online workshops. And I'll post the first one up here is, I'm going to be doing a workshop on storytelling for public speaking called Captivate Your Audience with Storytelling. And it's going to be focused mostly on public speaking, but it can be used for how you want to communicate your message in writing or through social media also. And just basically how you can take a story, like take your situation and translate it into a story and communicate your message out that way to your audience. And so that's going to be a 3-hour workshop. We're going to do it online here. It's going to be on January 10th. So you got about a month or more to sign up for it. But I'm doing, the rate's going to be $109. It's going to be an early bird rate of $89 you can do. And I'll actually send you guys a link with even a little promo code to get an extra discount on it too for joining me in the webinar here today. So, so yeah, if you guys are interested in learning more about storytelling, that workshop is one thing. And obviously I am here for questions. So anybody have any questions they would like to ask, I'm here. Thanks, Rebecca. And you guys will also get the recording of this too. It's going to get sent out to you guys automatically here in a couple of minutes or a little bit after we end this webinar. So, but yeah, I'll stick around for a couple more minutes. If you guys have any questions, I can invite you on screen. Yeah, of course, Julia, I'm happy to do it. Happy to do this. And also, as I said, I'm going to be doing a series of regular webinars on this. So I'll let me post a link up here so you guys can check it all out. But I'm going to be doing another webinar next week on Wednesday, and the topic of that webinar is going to be This is Your Brain on storytelling. So I'll get in a little bit deeper on how storytelling affects our personal brain chemistry. And then the week after that, I'm going to be talking more about how you can capture your audience with storytelling, kind of a preview of the workshop that we'll be doing in January. So if you guys did get, actually, I'm seeing some of you guys post that you got some good stuff or ideas from this. I'd really love to kind of hear from you of what you got out of it. You can send me a message or put it in the post here. But yeah, anything I can do to help you guys out, especially in this context where I can just kind of gather everything together in a webinar and put it out there, I'm happy to do it. And hopefully I didn't offend anybody by calling Adam and Eve mythology. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up then. Thank you guys all for joining me and coming in here. And I'm always available if you have questions you want to ask. And I hope to see you all in person soon. And we will talk later. All right. Thank you guys. You'll get the recording of the broadcast very soon. All right. Bye-bye.